The ships came without warning, and they blotted out the stars. Above New Marseille like a dark curtain falling. Across the sky, Commander Marcus Cole stood on the walls of the colony's defense station and watched the massive vessels descend through the atmosphere. Their hulls black as midnight and covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow with a faint red light. He had fought in the border wars for 15 years, and he had seen terrible things. But nothing had prepared him for this. "What are they?" asked Lieutenant Chun, her voice shaking as she stood beside him. Marcus did not answer because he already knew what they were facing. The Vethrani had come. Every spacefaring civilization knew about the Vethrani Dominion, and every civilization feared them beyond measure. They were ancient, beautiful, and absolutely terrifying. They fed on the life essence of sentient beings, draining their victims slowly over months while keeping them alive and aware. Some called them vampires, but that word was too simple for what they truly were. They had conquered hundreds of worlds across thousands of years, and no species had ever successfully resisted them. The colony's defense guns opened fire, sending bright streaks of energy into the sky. But the Vethrani ships absorbed the blast like water-absorbing pebbles. Marcus watched as one of the alien vessels returned fire, and the entire eastern wall of the colony exploded into flames, and rubble screams filled the air as people ran through the streets below, desperately searching for shelter that did not exist. "All units fall back to the central bunker," Marcus shouted into his communicator, knowing even as he gave the order that it would not matter. Within 3 hours, New Marseille had fallen. The Vethrani soldiers moved through the smoking ruins with terrible grace, their pale skin almost glowing in the dim light of the burning buildings. They wore armor that looked like it was made from shadow itself, and their eyes burned with a soft crimson light that made Marcus's blood run cold. He fought until his weapon ran out of charge, and then he fought with his fists until 3 Vethrani soldiers pinned him to the ground. One of them looked down at him with something like curiosity in those red eyes. "This one has spirit," the alien said in perfect English, its voice smooth and cold like ice sliding over glass. "The Empress will want to see him." Marcus was bound and dragged through the ruined streets alongside hundreds of other prisoners. He saw children crying for their parents and elderly people stumbling in confusion, and he felt a rage building inside him that burned hotter than any fire. They were loaded onto transport ships and taken up into the massive flagship that hung in orbit above the dying colony. The ship was called the Eternal Thirst, and Marcus would later learn that it had been the Empress's personal vessel for over 6,000 years inside. The ship was not what Marcus expected. Instead of cold metal corridors, he found himself walking through halls that looked like a palace from ancient Earth, with high ceilings covered in strange murals and floors made of something that resembled black marble. The Vethrani clearly valued beauty, even as they destroyed everything beautiful in the lives of their victims. The prisoners were separated into groups. Most were taken to holding cells deep in the belly of the ship, but Marcus and a few dozen others were led in a different direction. They were brought to chambers where Vethrani servants waited to clean them, dress them in fine clothes, and prepare them for something that made Marcus's stomach turn with dread. "You have been selected for the Empress's personal collection," one of the servants explained, his voice completely without emotion. "You should feel honored, for she only chooses the most interesting specimens." "I will kill her," Marcus said quietly, and the servant actually laughed. "Many have tried over 11,000 years," it replied. "None have succeeded, and all of them suffered greatly for the attempt." 11,000 years. Marcus could not even imagine living for that long, and he wondered what kind of creature could exist for so many centuries while feeding on the terror and pain of others. He was about to find out. The throne room of the Eternal Thirst was vast beyond belief, stretching out like a cathedral made for giants. Thousands of Vethrani nobles filled the space, their pale faces turning to watch as Marcus and the other chosen prisoners were led down a long crimson carpet toward the throne at the far end, and on that throne sat Empress Valtherix the Undying. She was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, with silver hair that flowed down past her shoulders like liquid moonlight, and features so perfect they seemed carved from porcelain. But her eyes were what captured Marcus and held him frozen in place. They were red like blood, deep as oceans, and filled with the weight of millennia. Those eyes had watched civilizations rise and fall. Those eyes had seen countless species beg for mercy before being consumed. Those eyes held memories that stretched back to a time when humanity was still learning to build fires and tell stories around them. The prisoners were forced to kneel, but Marcus remained standing until a guard struck him behind the knees and drove him down. Even then, he kept his head raised and his eyes fixed on the Empress. She noticed a small smile crossed her perfect lips, and she rose from her throne with a grace that seemed to defy gravity itself. The crowd parted as she descended the steps, her long black gown trailing behind her like a shadow given form. She walked past the other prisoners without even glancing at them, her attention fixed entirely on Marcus. When she stood before him, she reached down and placed one cold finger beneath his chin, tilting his face upward to meet her gaze. For a long moment, she simply stared at him, and Marcus felt as though she was looking not just at his face but into his very soul, reading every memory and every emotion he had ever experienced. Then something changed in her expression. Her eyes widened slightly, and for the briefest instant, Marcus saw something that looked almost like shock cross her ancient features. "I recognize you, human," she said, and her voice echoed through the silent throne room like thunder rolling across a distant sky. Court erupted in whispers. Nobles exchanged confused glances, and even the guards seemed uncertain what to make of their Empress's words. Marcus stared up at her in complete confusion. "I have never met you before," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. The Empress did not respond to his words. Instead, she turned to record and raised one hand for silence. "This one is not to be touched," she announced, her voice carrying absolute authority. "He will remain close to me, and anyone who harms him will answer to me personally." She looked back down at Marcus, and in her ancient crimson eyes, he saw something he never expected to find. There he saw memory, he saw loss, he saw the ghost of something she had, buried so deep that even she had forgotten it existed. Until this very moment. "Take him to the guest chambers," she commanded. "Not the cells. The chambers reserved for honored visitors." As the guards lifted Marcus to his feet and led him away, he looked back over his shoulder and found the Empress still watching him. She had not moved from where she stood, and her hand was pressed against her chest as though she was trying to hold something inside from breaking free. Marcus did not understand what had just happened. He did not know why an immortal alien Empress would look at a simple human soldier and see something that shook her to her very core, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: his life had just changed forever, and nothing would ever be the same again. The chambers they gave Marcus were more luxurious than anything he had ever seen in his entire life. The bed was enormous and covered in sheets that felt like clouds against his skin, and the windows looked out over an endless field of stars that stretched into infinity. But Marcus could not enjoy any of it because he knew that somewhere below him, his fellow colonists were suffering in cold cells while waiting to have their very life force drained from their bodies. He tried the door and found it unlocked, which surprised him. A Vethrani guard stood outside, but when Marcus stepped into the hallway, the guard simply bowed its head and gestured for him to continue. "You may go where you wish within the royal section of the ship," the guard explained. The Empress has declared you a guest, not a prisoner. Marcus did not trust this for even a moment. But he took advantage of the freedom to explore. He wandered through the beautiful corridors of the Eternal Thirst, passing Vethrani nobles who stared at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust to something that almost looked like fear. Why would ancient predators fear a single human? On his third day aboard the ship, the Empress summoned him to her private study. The room was filled with books and artifacts from hundreds of different worlds, collected over thousands of years of conquest. And in the center of it all sat Valthrix herself, looking more like a scholar than a monster. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her. "I have questions for you," Marcus said, keeping his back straight and his eyes locked on hers. "And I have questions for you," he replied, "starting with what you meant when you said you recognized me, because I know for certain we have never met before." The Empress studied him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression, something old and sad and almost vulnerable. "Tell me about human dreams," she said, ignoring his question entirely. "I have consumed the essence of over 300 sentient species, and none of them dream the way humans do. So tell me why that is." Marcus blinked in confusion. "I do not know why humans dream the way we do," he admitted. "We just always have, ever since we were living in caves and painting on walls." "And your music," the Empress continued, leaning forward with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. "Your art, your stories, your capacity to love even those who have hurt you. Where does it come from?" "It comes from being human," Marcus said slowly. "It is simply who we are." The Empress closed her eyes and let out a breath that sounded almost like a sigh of grief. "You do not know," she murmured. "You do not know what you carry inside you." Over the following weeks, Marcus became a strange fixture in the Empress's court. She summoned him almost every day, sometimes to answer her endless questions about humanity, and sometimes simply to sit with her in silence while she read ancient texts in languages he could not understand. Other prisoners whispered about him during the rare moments he was allowed to visit the holding cells. They called him a traitor and a collaborator, and Marcus could not blame them because he did not understand what was happening either. "She has not fed on you," one woman hissed at him through the bars of her cell. "She has not fed on any of us since you arrived. Why is that?" Marcus had no answer. Then one night, the Empress came to his chambers uninvited. She stood in his doorway like a ghost, her silver hair loose around her shoulders and her crimson eyes distant with memory. "I want to tell you a story," she said. And for the first time since he had met her, she sounded almost uncertain. "Will you listen?" Marcus nodded and gestured for her to enter. She sat on the edge of his bed, her hands folded in her lap, and she began to speak. 11,000 years ago, my people were dying," she said, her voice soft and far away. "Our sun was failing and our world was freezing, and we had no way to escape because we had not yet learned to travel between stars." Marcus listened in silence as the Empress continued her tale. "Then they came to us, the Luminari, beings of warmth and light who traveled the galaxy not to conquer, but to help. And they asked nothing in return for their aid." Her eyes grew distant with ancient memory. "They taught us how to survive by drawing life essence from other beings. And they helped us build our first ships so we could find new worlds. And they did all of this knowing that we might one day become a threat to others. Why would they help you if they knew that?" Marcus asked. The Empress smiled, but it was a sad smile filled with regret, because that was simply who they were. She replied, "They could not stop themselves from helping any more than your people can stop yourselves from dreaming. It was built into the very core of their being." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice trembled slightly. "There was one among them who found me when I was just a child, cold and frightened and certain I was going to die. And he wrapped me in his warmth and told me that everything would be all right. Tears began to form in the corners of her ancient eyes. His eyes were like yours. Not the color, but something deeper. Something I cannot describe with words. A frequency of the soul that I have never encountered again until the moment I looked at you. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What happened to them? He asked. What happened to the Luminari? The Empress's face hardened with old hatred. An elder race called the Void Singers grew jealous of the love other species showed the Luminari, and they hunted them to extinction, slaughtering every last one while the rest of the galaxy stood by and did nothing. She looked at Marcus with an intensity that made his heart race. I was there when the one who saved me was killed, and I watched the light fade from his eyes, and I have carried that memory for 11,000 years. The next day, the Empress summoned her high priests to the throne room and commanded them to perform what she called a genetic archaeology on Marcus. The process took several hours and involved technology so advanced that Marcus could not even begin to understand it when it was finished. The head priest approached the Empress with an expression of total shock on his pale face. Impossible, he whispered. Majesty, it should be impossible. Tell me, the Empress commanded. The priest swallowed hard before speaking. The human carries trace DNA from the Luminari within his genetic code. Not much, but enough to be unmistakable, and based on our analysis, this DNA exists in all humans across their entire species. The throne room fell into stunned silence. Marcus stared at the priest in disbelief. Are you saying that humans are descended from these Luminari? He asked. Not descended exactly, the priest explained. It is more like an echo. A remnant that somehow found its way into your species as you evolved on your distant world. As though the universe itself refused to let the Luminari disappear entirely, the Empress rose from her throne and walked slowly toward Marcus. The reason your people dream so vividly, she said quietly. The reason you create such beautiful art and music and stories. The reason you can love so deeply, even when you have been hurt. It is because you carry within you the essence of beings who are made of pure compassion. She reached out and touched his face gently. I have been feeding on hundreds of species for millennia, she continued. But humans are the only ones whose essence tastes like hope. And now I finally understand why. Marcus stood frozen as the weight of this revelation crashed over him somewhere in the distant past. Beings of light and warmth had given everything to help others, and somehow their legacy had survived in humanity itself. The Empress stepped back, and for the first time, Marcus saw shame in her ancient eyes. We were saved by creatures of pure love, she whispered. And we repaid their sacrifice by becoming the very monsters they died protecting the galaxy from. She turned away from him then, and Marcus saw her shoulders shake with what might have been sobs. What have we done? She asked the empty air. What have I done? Marcus did not have an answer, but as he watched the immortal Empress weep for the first time in thousands of years, he began to wonder if perhaps there was still hope, even for monsters who had forgotten how to be anything else. The days that followed the revelation were strange and tense aboard the Eternal Thirst. The Empress withdrew from public life, refusing to hold court and refusing to see anyone except Marcus himself. Rumors spread through the ship like wildfire, and the nobles began to whisper that their immortal ruler had been corrupted by the human prisoner she kept so close. Lord Sethrak was the first to speak these whispers aloud. He was old by Vethrani standards, nearly 4,000 years, and he had built his power on the conquest of dozens of worlds and the suffering of millions. Stood in the great hall surrounded by his supporters, and spoke with a voice like poison. The Empress has lost her way, he declared. She keeps a human as a pet and refuses to feed. And if she continues down this path, she will destroy everything our dominion has built. Marcus heard about this speech from one of the servants who had grown fond of him, and he knew that trouble was coming. He found the Empress in her private garden, a room filled with plants from 100 different worlds that somehow all thrived together under artificial sunlight. She sat on a stone bench with her eyes closed, and she looked more tired than any immortal being should ever look. "You need to address your court," Marcus said, sitting down beside her without waiting for permission. "Lord Sethric is gathering support against you, and if you do nothing, he will eventually make a move." The Empress opened her eyes and looked at him with something like amusement. "You are giving political advice to a being who has ruled an empire for 11,000 years?" she asked. "I am giving common sense to someone who seems to have forgotten it," Marcus replied. "You are not the only one who has lost their way. My people have made terrible mistakes throughout our history as well." She raised an eyebrow at this. "Tell me," she said. So Marcus told her about humanity's darkest chapters. He told her about the wars they had fought against each other, the atrocities they had committed in the name of power and greed and fear. He told her about slavery and genocide and the countless times humans had treated other humans as less than human. But he also told her about how they had changed. He told her about the movements that had risen up to fight against injustice, about the slow and painful progress towards something better. He told her about the heroes who had stood against tyranny and the ordinary people who had simply refused to accept that cruelty was inevitable. "We are not good," Marcus admitted. "We have never been purely good. And I do not think we ever will be, but we have always had the capacity to choose differently. And enough of us have made that choice over and over again that we have actually become better." He looked at her with steady eyes. "You have lived 11,000 years, he said. "That is long enough to be a monster, but maybe it is also long enough to be something else." The Empress stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see ancient thoughts moving behind her crimson eyes. "You make it sound so simple," she said quietly. "It is not simple," Marcus replied. "It is the hardest thing in the universe, but that does not mean it is impossible." Something shifted in the Empress that day. Something that had been frozen for millennia, beginning to thaw. She began to eat less, drawing only the minimum life essence she needed to survive from volunteers. Among her loyal servants, she ordered that the human prisoners be treated better, given real food and clean quarters, and freedom to move about certain sections of the shipment. She began to speak with Marcus every day, not as an empress to a prisoner, but as one person to another. The court noticed these changes, and the whispers grew louder. Lord Sethric held secret meetings with other noble houses, building an alliance of those who believed the old ways were the only ways worth following. "She is weak," he told them. "She has been seduced by human sentiment, and if we do not act, she will lead our entire civilization to ruin." Marcus knew the danger was growing, but he also knew that he could not stop what was coming through politics alone. He needed to reach the part of the Empress that still believed change was possible. One evening, he found her standing by the great windows of her study, staring out at the stars with an expression of profound loneliness. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Joining her by the window, she nodded without looking at him. "The luminary who saved you when you were a child." Marcus began carefully. "What was his name?" The Empress was silent for so long that Marcus thought she would not answer. Then she spoke, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "Alindros," she said. "His name was Alindros, and in 11,000 years, you are the first person I have spoken that name to since the day he died." She finally turned to look at Marcus, and there were tears on her cheeks. "He told me something before the Void Singers came for him," she continued. "He said that love was the only force that grew stronger when you gave it away. And I did not understand what he meant until now." She reached out and took Marcus's hand in hers, and her grip was surprisingly warm. "I have taken life essence from countless beings for millennia," she said, "and I have only grown emptier with each feeding. But these past weeks of giving, instead of taking, have made me feel more alive than I have felt in thousands of years. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. That is what Alindros would have wanted, he said. That is what the Luminari sacrificed themselves hoping would eventually happen. The moment was interrupted by the sound of an alarm blaring through the ship. Guards burst into the study with weapons drawn. And one of them rushed to the Empress with panic on his face. Majesty, there has been an attempt on the human's life, he reported. Lord Sethrak's assassins tried to poison his food, but one of the kitchen servants intercepted it and died in his place. The Empress's expression changed in an instant, all the softness draining away to reveal something ancient and terrifying. Where is Lord Sethrak now? She asked, and her voice was cold as the void between stars. He has gathered his supporters in the Great Hall, Majesty, and he is claiming that you have been compromised by human influence. The Empress released Marcus's hand and straightened to her full height. Come with me, she commanded. Both of you will see what happens to those who threaten what I have chosen to protect. The Great Hall fell silent as the Empress entered with Marcus at her side. Lord Sethrak stood at the far end surrounded by hundreds of his supporters, and he smiled when he saw them arrive. Majesty, he said with false respect, we were just discussing the future of our dominion and whether you are still fit to lead it. The Empress walked toward him slowly, and the crowd parted before her like water before a ship. You sent assassins to kill my guest, she said. You murdered a loyal servant in your attempt, and now you stand in my hall and question my fitness to rule? Sethrak's smile faltered slightly, but he held his ground. The human has corrupted you, he declared. He has made you forget who we are and what we need to survive. And I am simply doing what is necessary to save our people. The Empress stopped just a few feet from him, and when she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the vast chamber. I have forgotten nothing, she said. I remember everything, including the truth of what we were and what we have become. She moved faster than Marcus's eyes could follow. One moment standing still, and the next holding Sethrak by the throat with one hand while his supporters scrambled backward in terror. We were saved by beings of pure love, she announced to the watching crowd. And we have spent 11,000 years betraying that gift. But I say that ends now. She released Sethrak and let him fall gasping to the floor. Anyone who wishes to follow the old ways may leave my presence and my ship, she declared. But anyone who raises a hand against the human or against my choice to change will answer to me. And I promise you, after 11,000 years, I have become very creative in my punishments. The hall remained frozen in shocked silence. Marcus stepped forward and stood beside the Empress. And in that moment, something profound shifted in the balance of power. Some of the nobles moved to stand behind Lord Sethrak, their faces twisted with hatred and fear. But others, far more than Marcus expected, moved to stand behind the Empress. The Vethrani dominion was dividing, and a storm was coming that would shake the very foundations of the galaxy. As Marcus looked out at the divided court, he realized that his simple human words had set something in motion that could not be stopped for better or worse. Everything was about to change. War came to the Vethrani dominion like a wildfire burning across dry grassland. Lord Sethrak fled the eternal thirst with his supporters and made his way to the Vethrani homeworld of Vethraxis Prime, where he declared the Empress a traitor and named himself the new ruler of the Dominion. Half the noble houses rallied to his banner, drawn by his promises to maintain the old ways of conquest and feeding. The other half remained loyal to Empress Veltharix, though many of them did so out of tradition rather than any true belief in her vision of change. Within weeks, Vethrani ships were firing on other Vethrani ships, and worlds that had known peace for centuries became battlegrounds. The Empress watched the reports of destruction from her command center aboard the Eternal Thirst, and Marcus saw the weight of every death pressing down on her shoulders. This is my fault, she said quietly. If I had not wavered, if I had simply continued as we always have, none of this would be happening. Marcus shook his head firmly. If you had continued as you always have, my people would still be in chains waiting to be drained of their lives, he replied. Change always has a cost. But that does not mean it is not worth paying. The Empress looked at him with something like wonder in her ancient eyes. How do humans find the strength to believe such things? She asked. Because the alternative is despair, Marcus said simply. And we have learned that despair helps no one. It was Marcus who first suggested the impossible. He stood before the Empress and her war council and proposed an alliance with the United Human Confederacy. The room erupted in chaos. The humans hate us. One general shouted, "We have conquered their colonies and fed on their people for decades. Why would they ever agree to fight alongside us?" Because we share a common enemy now, Marcus replied, his voice cutting through the noise. Sethrak will not stop with the Empress. He sees all species as nothing but food, but the Empress is offering something different. She is offering a future where humans and Vethrani can coexist. The Empress raised her hand for silence, and the room fell quiet immediately. Send the message, she commanded. Let the humans decide for themselves whether they wish to see me as an enemy or as something new. The response from the Human Confederacy came 3 days later, and it was not encouraging. Admiral Sarah Chun, commander of the Human Defense Fleet, appeared on the view screen with fury burning in her eyes. You have killed thousands of our people, she said coldly. You have turned our colonies into feeding grounds. And now you ask for our help because your own kind have turned against you? The Empress stepped forward to face the screen. I ask for nothing, she said. I am offering something instead, and you may accept or reject it as you choose. And what exactly are you offering? The Admiral demanded. A future, the Empress replied. I am offering to release every human prisoner in my custody. I am offering to sign a treaty that permanently ends Vethrani predation on human worlds. And I am offering to share our technology so that your species can defend itself against any threat. Admiral Chun stared at her in disbelief. Why would you do this? She asked. Why would you give up everything your empire has taken? The Empress glanced at Marcus before answering. Because a human reminded me of something I had forgotten, she said. He reminded me that survival means nothing if you lose your soul in the process. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Then Admiral Chun spoke again, and her voice had lost some of its edge. There is a man among your prisoners who vouches for you, she said. A Commander Marcus Cole. He sent a message with your offer, and he swears on his life that you can be trusted. Marcus stepped forward so the Admiral could see him. Admiral, I know how this sounds, he said. I know that everything you have heard about the Vethrani tells you to refuse this offer. But I have seen something change aboard this ship. I have seen an ancient monster choose to become something better. And I believe that if we give her this chance, she will keep her word. Admiral Chun studied him for a long moment. You were taken prisoner at New Marseille, she said. My sister was stationed there. She was among those we thought lost. Lieutenant Chun, Marcus said immediately. She is alive. She is here on this ship, and she can speak to you herself, if you wish. The conversation that followed between the Admiral and her sister lasted over an hour, and when it ended, Admiral Chun's face had changed completely. We will join you, she said to the Empress. Not because we trust you, but because my sister trusts Commander Cole, and because she says she has seen your people begin to change with her own eyes. The Battle of Vareth Prime would be remembered for centuries as the day everything changed. Human dreadnoughts dropped out of hyperspace alongside Vethrani shadow cruisers, their weapon systems linked and their commanders coordinating through communication channels that had never existed. Before Lord Sethrak's fleet outnumbered them nearly 2-1. But numbers were not everything in war. The human ships were sturdy, and their weapons were powerful, designed over decades of fighting to survive against overwhelming odds. The Vethrani loyalists were cunning, and their technology was ancient and refined. Their ships moving through space like predators hunting prey. Together, they formed something new, a combined force that fought with a fury neither species could have achieved alone. Marcus watched the battle from the bridge of the Eternal Thirst, standing beside the Empress as her officers called out reports of destruction and victory. Human cruiser Damascus is taking heavy fire on the left flank. An officer shouted before anyone could respond. A Vethrani destroyer swooped in to shield the human ship, absorbing the enemy fire with its reinforced hull. Vethrani loyalist vessel Nightfall has lost engines. Another officer reported a human frigate immediately moved to protect the disabled ship, while repair teams worked frantically to restore power. Marcus felt something shift in his chest as he watched species that should have been mortal, enemies fighting and dying to protect each other. This was what the Luminari had sacrificed themselves, for this was what they had hoped would someday be possible. The battle raged for hours, and the losses were terrible on both sides, but slowly, inevitably, Lord Sethrak's forces began to fall back. The combined fleet pushed forward, driving the enemy toward the planet below where the final confrontation would take place. It was on the surface of Vareth Prime that Marcus came face to face with Lord Sethrak himself. The ancient Vethrani Lord had retreated to his command bunker, and Marcus led a strike team of both humans and Vethrani loyalists to disable the planetary defense grid. They fought through corridors filled with enemy soldiers, human rifles firing alongside Vethrani shadow blades. And when they finally reached the control center, Sethrak was waiting for them. "You," he hissed when he saw Marcus. "You are the one who poisoned our Empress's mind. You are the disease that has infected our entire civilization." Marcus stepped forward, his weapon raised. "I did not poison anything," he replied. "I just reminded her of something she already knew." Sethrak laughed, a terrible sound like breaking glass. "You think you have won?" he demanded. "You think this changes anything? The universe is built on predation. The strong feed on the weak, and no amount of human sentiment will ever change that truth." He moved faster than Marcus could react, knocking the weapon from his hands and seizing him by the throat. "Let me show you what your hope tastes like," Sethrak snarled. And he began to drain Marcus's life essence. The pain was beyond anything Marcus had ever experienced, like having his very soul torn from his body piece by piece. But something unexpected happened as Sethrak suddenly released him and stumbled backward with a scream of agony. "What is this?" he shrieked, clawing at his own face. "What are you?" Marcus fell to his knees, gasping for breath, and he realized what had happened. His hope, his defiance, his sheer stubborn refusal to give up even in the face of death. It had burned Sethrak from the inside out. The essence of the Luminari that lived within all humans was poisoned to a being of pure corruption. Sethrak collapsed to the ground, his body convulsing as the light of human hope destroyed him from within. The other members of the strike team stared in shock as the ancient lord who had terrorized the galaxy for millennia crumbled to dust before their eyes. Marcus looked up at them with tired eyes. "I guess hope is stronger than hunger after all," he said, and then everything went dark. Marcus woke in a bed that was not his own, surrounded by soft light and the quiet hum of medical equipment. He opened his eyes slowly and found the Empress sitting beside him, her crimson eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made his heart skip. "How long was I unconscious?" he asked, his voice rough and weak. 3 days, she replied, and there was something in her voice he had never heard before, something that sounded almost like fear. "The healers were not sure you would wake at all. You came very close to losing your entire essence." Marcus tried to sit up, but his body refused to cooperate. Did we win? He asked. The Empress smiled, and it transformed her face into something beautiful and warm. We won, she confirmed. Sethric is dead. His forces have surrendered. And the war is over. She reached out and took his hand gently, her fingers intertwining with his. You saved us all, she said quietly, not just by defeating Sethrak, but by showing both our peoples what is possible when we choose hope over hatred. Over the following weeks, as Marcus slowly recovered his strength, he watched the Vethrani Dominion transform into something new. The Empress stood before her people on the steps of the ancient palace on Vethrax's prime and announced the end of the harvest. No longer would the Vethrani prey on sentient beings without their consent. Instead, they would develop new ways to survive, synthetic essence created by their scientists, voluntary donations from species who wish to trade, and perhaps eventually evolution into something that no longer needed to feed at all. Not everyone accepted this new order. Some Vethrani fled into the depths of space, refusing to give up the old ways, and the Empress knew that hunting them down would be the work of decades or even centuries. But many more embraced the change, especially the younger generations who had never known a time before the war. They looked at the alliance between their people and humanity and saw something worth fighting for. Human prisoners were released, all of them, and ships carried them back to the worlds from which they had been taken. Lieutenant Chun hugged her brother goodbye at the shuttle bay of the Eternal Thirst, tears streaming down her face. Come home, she begged him. You have done enough. You have done more than anyone could have asked. Please come home. Marcus held her tight and smiled sadly. I cannot, he said. There is still work to be done here, and I think I am meant to be part of it. She looked at him with understanding in her eyes. It is her, is it not? She asked. The Empress. You love her. Marcus did not deny it. I do not know if love is the right word, he admitted. But there is something between us, something that feels like it was meant to exist long before either of us was born. A formal ceremony was held to mark the signing of the peace treaty between the Vethrani Dominion and the United Human Confederacy. Empress Valthrix and Admiral Chun stood side by side as they pressed their marks to the document, and the assembled crowds of both species cheered with voices that shook the walls. It was the first time in the history of the galaxy that the Vethrani had signed a treaty of equals with any species. It was the first time humans had been seen as anything other than prey by the ancient predators, and it was only the beginning. Marcus was appointed as the first human ambassador to the Vethrani court, a position that had never existed before and that many on both sides had thought would never be possible. He threw himself into the work, helping to establish trade routes and cultural exchanges and joint scientific projects that would benefit both peoples. The Empress watched him with something like pride as he navigated the complex politics of her court, winning over skeptics and building bridges that she herself had never thought possible. You are remarkable, she told him one evening as they walked together through her private garden. I have lived for 11,000 years and met beings from hundreds of species, but I have never known anyone quite like you. Marcus laughed softly. I'm just a soldier who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, he replied. Or maybe the right place at the right time? I am still not sure which. The Empress stopped walking and turned to face him. You are so much more than that, she said. You carry the light of the Luminari within you. But it is not just their genetic echo that makes you special. It is the way you have used that gift to change the course of history. She reached up and touched his face gently. Alindris would have been proud of you, she whispered. He would have said that this is exactly what he hoped would happen someday. Marcus covered her hand with his own. I am not him, he said. I am not the one you remember. I am just human. The Empress smiled. and there were tears in her ancient eyes. "I know," she replied. "That is why I am asking you to stay." The request hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. "Stay?" Marcus asked. "As ambassador?" "As more than that," she said. "As a companion, as a partner. As someone to remind me every day that change is possible and that love is stronger than hunger." She paused, and vulnerability flickered across her features. "I am asking you to share my life, or at least as much of it as your human years will allow." Marcus looked into her crimson eyes and saw something he had never expected to find there. He saw hope. He saw longing. He saw the same thing he felt in his own heart. A connection that transcended species and history and all the terrible things that had come before. "Yes," he said simply. "The years that followed were not easy. There were those among both species who resisted the alliance, who clung to old hatreds and old fears and refused to see the new world that was being built. There were setbacks and failures and moments when it seemed like everything might fall apart, but Marcus and the Empress faced each challenge together. Human stubbornness and Vethrani patience, combining into something stronger than either could have been alone. And slowly, generation by generation, the galaxy began to change. Human children grew up reading stories about the Empress who had chosen to become something better. Vethrani children learned about the Luminari and the sacrifice they had made so long ago. Both peoples learned to see each other not as predator and prey, but as partners in building a future worth living in. Marcus lived to be 117 years old, far longer than any human before him, perhaps extended by the faint echo of Luminari essence that flowed through his veins on the day he died. The Empress was beside him, holding his hand just as she had done when he first woke after the Battle of Varith Prime. "Thank you," she whispered as the light faded from his eyes. "Thank you for reminding me how to live." She buried him in her private garden, beneath a tree that bloomed with flowers of pure gold, and every day for the next 10,000 years. She visited that spot and told him about the world they had built together. The humans and the Vethrani became the closest of allies, their combined civilization spreading across the galaxy and bringing peace to worlds that had known only war. Whenever anyone asked how it had all begun, the Empress would smile and tell them about a human soldier who had looked into the eyes of a monster and seen something worth saving. He was not special because of the Luminari DNA in his blood, she would say. He was special because when given the choice between vengeance and mercy, between hatred and hope, he chose hope every single time. She would look up at the stars with ancient eyes that still held the warmth of that long-ago love. "That is what makes humans extraordinary," she would continue. "Not their strength or their technology or even their connection to the Luminari, but their stubborn, foolish, beautiful belief that tomorrow can be better than today." And in the garden where Marcus Cole rested, the golden flowers bloomed eternally, a reminder to all who saw them that love was indeed the only force in the universe that grew stronger when you gave it away. The Luminari were gone, but their legacy lived on in every human who dared to hope, and in every being who learned from them that compassion was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. And somewhere across the vast reaches of space and time, Alendros smiled, knowing that his sacrifice had not been in vain.